ISIL made headlines around the world in 2014 when its fighters pushed out Iraqi soldiers and took control of cities like Mosul and Sinjar. And in what became known as the Sinjar massacre, thousands of Yazidi men, women, and children were killed. In response to ISIL's rapid territorial gains, the United States and its allies formed a coalition to fight the armed group. They launched airstrikes on ISIL hideouts, its fighters, and convoys. In October last year, a U.S. military operation in northwest Syria resulted in the death of ISIL's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead.
In 2018, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced the appointment of a special advisor to support efforts to investigate ISIL's crimes. As the head of the UN investigative team, the special advisor's mandate is to collect, preserve, and store evidence. But how are the investigations conducted? And will it bring justice to the countless victims in Iraq and Syria? The United Nations Special Advisor, Karim Khan, talks to Al Jazeera.
Karim Khan, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
My pleasure.
So you've been investigating the alleged crimes committed by members of ISIL. What sort of picture is emerging in terms of who are the victims?
Humanity. All communities, nobody was spared. Anybody that refused to do the bayat to the contorted and twisted ideology of Daesh.
Bayat meaning, of course, allegiance
to the un-Islamic state. What I insist and maintain is the un-Islamic state, a complete perverted contortion of a religion whose very name is peace.
Now, as you're collecting evidence, though, the question comes up, what ultimately are you going to do with it?
It has to feed into courts. And this is...
But which courts? That's a big question right now.
Any court. I mean, that's the beauty of the mandate. Any court where fair trials are possible. The simple reality is, going back to the first question, every community has been targeted. Shia, Sunni, Shabak, Kakai, the Yazidis, every single Turkmen. Any community of Iraq and the wider world that were viewed as apostates or were viewed as not buying in to the Daesh ideology faced immense persecution, torture, executions and killings. So we're an investigative team. The Council, Security Council unanimously has realized that legal accountability is an important part of the equation if one really wants to expose the ideology, which is the fuel to the criminal group that we see. And so we're there to feed into any court, anywhere in the world where fair trials are possible. Iraq, of course,
that's a key question, though. That's a key statement that you made there. So anywhere where a fair trial is possible. The reality is, though, that those countries which are generally regarded as having a fair and decent justice system, well, many of them don't want to see ISIL members come to their countries, even if they are their citizens, and a lot of them are ending up in places like Iraq to face trial. Do you think that that is a satisfactory situation?
I think the satisfactory situation will be when the rights of victims are at the center of both my team's work and the consciousness of the international community. It's when the right of survivors is met by real focused investigations, so we don't just simply pay lip service to accountability. We don't parrot the word of no impunity. We do it by way of focused investigations. And there are many countries of the world that are very interested and that are supporting the work of my team, the United Nations investigative team, to promote accountability of Daesh. We've already fed evidence into Finland, for example, where fair trials are possible. We've fed evidence into those courts with the full assistance of the government of Iraq, and it's to the very great credit of Iraq itself that, notwithstanding the obvious challenges, they have pledged and are giving the full support, their full support, to the Security Council team created for this very purpose.
Let me read to you a part of a report by Human Rights Watch, May the 31st, 2019. And it's criticized some of the trials of ISIL suspects in Iraq, referencing confessions extracted through torture and unfair trials. Are they wrong?
The more interesting one, perhaps, you know, if there was perfection anywhere in the world.
But this is not simply a matter of perfection, right? Extracting confessions under torture.
No, of course. I'm coming to that if I can finish the question.
Sure.
So, you know, if there was perfection anywhere in the world, there'd be no need for support. So I look at things quite objectively as a lawyer.
Right.
It's to the great credit of Iraq that we have not been imposed upon them. The Security Council, with one clarion voice, with complete unanimity, has said that this team that I have the honor to lead is needed to ensure credible, independent investigations. Mm-hmm. The only reason we are in Iraq, that we can conduct our independent investigations, is because Iraq agrees us to do so. They have not been dragged kicking and screaming to the Hall of Justice. They realize that there are deficiencies and limitations and challenges. And quite honestly, sometimes we're on our high horses in the developed world. If this challenge of Daesh, if the hundreds of thousands of Daesh members and the criminality, the level of criminality we've seen, were suddenly transplanted into the courts of London or Paris or Berlin, no court in the world could deal with it because it's on a scale that is almost unheralded. And so I think, you know, things are improving. You've talked about Human Rights Watch report. The latest report of human rights has noted the real move away from confessions in some courts. They mention, for example, the terrorist court in Mosul, a bid to rely more upon evidence as opposed to confessions. So the trajectory shows signs of some positive developments. It's still not perfect, no legal system is. But I don't lose sight of the fact that this willingness to be self-critical and say we need support. We need support from the international community. We need support from lawyers and investigators and analysts to get our teeth into this mountain of evidence that is an Everest to climb, to ensure the rights of victims are vindicated. I think that's a positive development. It doesn't mean the task is easy. If it was plain sailing, we wouldn't be talking about it.
I understand your point about your ability to conduct a credible investigation, that you have that freedom to investigate, and the credit you'd like to give to Iraqi authorities. Understood. However, my question more is whether you're frustrated that at some point you face some frustration, at least, that having finished your work, gathered the evidence, it does seem like there's a challenge in bringing that evidence to a fair system. Are you satisfied? Let me put the question this way. So, am I correct in understanding right now you are satisfied with the legal process in Iraq?
I'll put it this way, Iraq itself as a sovereign authority, and it's repeated in the Council that we respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iraq. So the most eloquent voice is not mine, but that of the government of Iraq. The truth of the matter is that Iraq itself, number one, realizes there are challenges, realizes it needs an increase in capacity. In the terms of reference agreed between the government of Iraq and the United Nations before my appointment, it states that my team is required not only to conduct credible investigations, independent investigations leading to fair trials, but we should share knowledge and build capacity. That obviously is an acceptance that capacity needs to be improved. Now,
are you satisfied?
Let me finish the question, if you don't mind. The question was one of the frustrations. Mm-hmm. The victims have every right to be frustrated because the crimes of Daesh took place in 2014, 2015, 2016. A resolution was passed by the Security Council in 2017. We've already fed into the courts in Finland. We're assisting other states. We're assisting Iraq with exhumations. The cases you talked about earlier, they deal with terrorism. I don't have a mandate for terrorism. My mandate are acts by Daesh, so it's acts by Daesh, that constitute either the international crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity,
but that's precisely what I'm talking about.
And my point is this, that Iraq has just recently, before the protests, the President has put forward a bill to Parliament which domesticates those international crimes. So whilst we're not in a perfect situation, the foundations are being built where fair trials, God willing, will be possible.
You still haven't, with all due respect, answered my question. Are you satisfied with the system in Iraq? And
I am not satisfied with the legal system anywhere in the world. Okay. If a legal system was perfect anywhere, we'd have no need for Court of Appeals, we'd have no need for European Court of Human Rights or the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Justice requires humility to accept the fallibility of man and the constant scrutiny. As Virgil said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And so satisfaction has, with the greatest of respect, is an irrelevant consideration. It's one of humility and striving towards fairness, justice based upon evidence.
It might be
and it eschews complacency.
It might be an important consideration, though, in establishing that justice that you're talking about for the victims themselves. If you're a victim of a crime committed by Daesh, surely you want to know that the right person or people have been apprehended, that, you know, odd people haven't just been rounded up and forced to confess under torture.
But that's why we're here. Because
I understand your job that you're doing, but my question is, okay, let me put
You're conflating two things. With respect, I'm trying to dissect the fallacy of your argument. You're conflating the government of Iraq with the United Nations investigative team to promote accountability, which has the full support of the international community. All 15 members of the Council passed the resolution with no dissents, no abstentions in September 2017. The mandate was unanimously approved with no abstentions, no veto, no vote against in September. And we have been created to ensure independent, credible investigations, and Iraq has supported that. So sure, I think what you're looking at is you're looking at another aspect of the sovereignty issue of what Iraq is doing. I'm talking about what the United Nations is doing that will lead to fair trials.
I understand that very clearly. I'm not conflating the two. My question, though, is I want to get your perspective, because after you finish your work, that has to go on to court somewhere in the world.
Not
right?
When we finish our work. I mean, this is why I'm saying I'm trying to brief you on what the mandate is and what we're doing.
I'm not saying your work is finished. When you conduct investigations, surely you want to see the result of that investigation prosecuted. As you said, you're passing it on to Finland, right?
Already prosecutions are taking place.
So you are passing that on to national and sovereign jurisdictions, and I'm trying to get your feelings as to whether you're satisfied that national jurisdictions are always taking up the good work you're doing in the best way.
I think what my issue with you, and I think you should move on because you're dancing on a pinhead, the word satisfaction is one that is pregnant. I think there's been tremendous progress. I think there's a tremendous willingness by states, by Iraq and by third states to support the mandate of the Security Council. We have already, within a year of being established, fed into the judicial processes in third states. We've helped with exhumations in Iraq. We're building capacity. I think that's extraordinary, in fact. Not satisfied, that's extraordinary, from startup to operational within a year in the United Nations administrative structure. And I think there's tremendous credit to the victims we've engaged with that are speaking to us, to the team itself, and also to states supporting us, and most of all to the government of Iraq that is giving us that support, because words are cheap, action is really what matters. And we are working independently in Iraq, reporting directly to the Security Council, and I think that's exactly what the victims expect.
Can I get your comment on what the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has been talking about? He's been urging European countries to take back ISIL members as a matter of establishing justice. Do you think it's important that European countries accept their nationals back from Syria and Iraq?
You're trying to move me into an area of political debate. I'm not going to comment on what Secretary of State Pompeo said or whatever. The United Nations mandate that I had has to promote international standards and best practice. I applaud those countries that are taking back their nationals and that are willing and able to do so. And we are willing, and we've expressed it, to feed in and assist those domestic courts that have taken back foreign fighters. If other states have national security concerns, legal impediments, or other reasons why they're not taking them back, our job is to make sure that there's still accountability. And so what we are doing, we're an investigative team on the lookout for a court. And policy decisions, that rests upon the sovereign states of the United Nations. They must grasp this nettle of choice. What we have to do is feed into any courts that exist and that are available.
I understand the political sensitivities of your job, and of course, if you don't want to comment on something, that's your absolute right. I would like to try.
I've commented on it. I'm not walking away from a question.
Putting Mike Pompeo aside. No, it's not about I don't like. We'll put Mike Pompeo aside.
Yes.
The idea that many countries, or some countries, with good standards of justice, almost universally recognized as having a good standard and process of justice, shying away from taking back their citizens has prompted some in the UN, like the UN Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Executions, Agnes Callamard, who is a UN official, like yourself, expressing concern in August about reports of the transfer of French nationals to places like Iraq for trial because of torture and unfair process. Now, what I'm trying to get at is the question of, do you see as an investigator, I know it's not your responsibility what happens within national jurisdictions, I get that point, but would you like to see, from your perspective, more countries in Europe take back their citizens for trial at home? Do you think that would help the process of
I think any state that is able to take back their own nationals are to be commended and are to be assisted and they're encouraged to do so. But our job really is heavy enough by itself. Our job is, we're in the field in Iraq, we're in Mosul, we're on the border, we're in Sinjar, we're in Speicher. The team is in Baghdad at the moment and in the north of the country, collecting evidence, meeting survivors, meeting victims of Daesh, and seeking to speak to people that are detained members of Daesh. Our job is to build the cases so that the rights of the international community, the right of victims and also humanity at large to justice is realised. And wherever fair trials are possible, I think what my responsibility is as head of the team is to bend over backwards to try to provide evidence to those processes in line with international standards so that independent judges can critique that evidence and can make decisions as to guilt or innocence, not based upon sectarianism, not based upon notions of collective guilt, but based upon evidence. And that's our job. And I think that's, that's our raison d'etre. As I said, I think it's tremendous progress in 1 year, but Rome is not built in a day. Have we achieved all aspects of the mandate? Of course not. But we've been in Iraq just over a year, and I've told you already some of the areas where we have moved, you know, exhumations, collecting evidence, building support from the international community, trying to ensure that we receive the information, evidence, statements and material from various NGOs, from third states, and feed into fair process courts and prosecutions where they are possible. So I think in terms of a year, it's outstanding. But of course, at the same time, given the scale of criminality and the perverted and cruel treatment by Daesh, it's also only the first drop. There's a whole ocean of accountability that one has to swim towards.
Some have called for an international tribunal. Do you think that would be helpful?
I think these are political decisions. And
what's your thought? I know that
my own thought is there's no one silver bullet. I mean, journalists and politicians often want to reduce everything to its essence as if there's a one silver bullet that will slay, you know, Dracula, the Dracula of Daesh. The reality is, if you look at the temporal scope, the years, it wasn't a one-day incident like the Hariri killing in Lebanon. It was an occupation and control over a swathe of territory the size of the United Kingdom for years. And no one legal system, no one court, international, local, will be sufficient to ensure justice. We have to help Iraq increase capacity based upon evidence, fairness, international standards, feed into any courts, give assistance to any court anywhere in the world where they're taking back foreign fighters or finding Daesh suspects in their territory, and any other structures that may be created will feed into those. So for us, the forum is less important than the fact that there is justice and accountability so that a record can be created that will stand the test of time. This is why, after all, Nuremberg has value. it was a means of separating the poison of the National Socialism and the principles of Mein Kampf from the German people. It avoided collective guilt of the German people. It created a record that could not be, when revisionism took place, it couldn't be taken seriously. All those factors are just as important for Daesh, that we show, we reveal, we peel back the ugly face of Daesh, and beneath the flag there's nothing Islamic about it. It's a complete contortion of Islam. It's a virus of hatred, of cruelty, of lack of tolerance, completely opposite to La Ikraha fi Din, and it will ensure that individuals that are brought before the court are individuals charged not because of their sect or their community or their tribe, but because of the evidence that we have.
And just to translate for viewers,
no compulsion in the matter of religion.
Okay.
In Surah Al-Baqarah.
I would like to get your perspective, because you're working in very difficult places. Do you have a perspective on what should happen to perhaps the tens of thousands? I think there's 70,000 people being held in some of these camps like Al-Hol. There are people who are family members of ISIL members. What's your perspective on what the long-term situation should be for some of those people?
I think it's a profound question. And I think the status quo is simply not an option.
They're kind of lost in a no man's land, aren't they?
The status quo is not an option. And I think the basic principles of humanity require an understanding that amongst those, there's going to be a whole spectrum. Some are going to be violent men and women that would, if they are given half a chance, kill, maim, rape, and terrorize communities in Iraq, in the region, and in other parts of the world. And those individuals that are the hardcore, those that have either committed past crimes and would try to do so again, they need to be identified and subjected to proper investigation and due process. There may well be amongst those, undoubtedly, women also, and children that have been, some women that may be battered wives that have been dragged along by Daesh, by their abusive Daesh husbands, that they have to be treated in a separate way. Some children that are young, again, rehabilitation rather than criminal responsibility. The welfare of the child has to be put forward in terms of particularly the youngest children. And in relation to those that have been weaponized, we have Yazidi children. That poor things, they were abducted, they were kidnapped, they were brainwashed, they were weaponized, and they may have committed crimes, but they can't be held or treated in the same way as a very hardcore Daesh member that has recruited them. So it requires both principle, humanity, and a degree of wisdom. And my own view is the status quo is simply not an option. We can't have an environment where all of those remain mixed together, in which those that may be innocent or vulnerable are kept in the same environment with those that are promoting and advocating a very virulent ideology of hatred. And if they're kept together, of course, the most virulent people of hatred are not going to get more moderate.
They become breeding grounds for more.
Absolutely. That's the risk.
Your focus is, of course, on investigating. I wonder, though, if you have a perspective, a hope that after or as part of your investigative work, that contributes to the end of the problem with Daesh, or the end of of people joining very radicalized groups in this part of the world that go on to commit the sort of atrocities that necessitate people like you having to come in and investigate. Do you think that can be done simply through, not to undermine the investigative work that you're doing, but can that goal be achieved simply by investigations and courts and trials? Or is it a much bigger and more complex problem?
It's much bigger and more complex. I'm always acutely aware, and I think it's only fair to be quite honest about it. You must have vision, have imagination and creativity and say what the law can do. But one must also be honest enough to say what the law cannot do. So I think there needs to be parallel processes all at once. But without doubt, it's my considered opinion that based upon proper investigations, proper fair trials, we can also expose the ideology that will help create a firewall that may prevent that ideology trespassing even further, permeating even deeper amongst other vulnerable communities whether it's in Iraq or other parts of the world. And I think that's important. And that will be done by actually bringing into the sunlight, into the daylight,
the crimes that were committed.
The crimes that were committed and the falsity that this had anything to do with Islamic precepts. It's as opposite to Islam as the night is today.
Karim Khan, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you so much.